It's Tuesday, January 21st. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. We're living in a time of record low fertility rates across the country. Today on the show, we're going to speak with folks who've made the choice to live child-free. Multiple perspectives about why more and more of us are not having children. And for the whole context bit, I'll preface the show by saying, like I mentioned just then in the introduction, this is about folks who are making the choice, right? There are many who would love to have kids, but cannot because of infertility, all of which takes an emotional, biological, financial, and social toll on folks. Today, though, it's the discussion of choice. Canada, like I mentioned, about fertility rates, that country of ours. Its fertility rate is so low that it's a member of the group of lowest low fertility countries, including South Korea, Spain, Italy, and Japan. The latest data was from 2023, right? So that was after a general decline for more than 15 years. So it hit in 2023, 1.26 children per woman, a childbearing person. That's according to StatsCan. For the same year, for Newfoundland and Labrador, 1.08, so lower than that average. My question for you as you're listening today, are you child-free? Are you on the fence? Do you have questions for the guests? The text line is open, 709-327-8206. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. Or if you just kind of want to leave us one of those old-fashioned voice messages, the signal line, 709-576-5260. Full house today. 4 folks in studio, 1 person on the line, and we're also going to call someone a little later on as well. So we've got, let me see, I'll go right to left, I suppose. Shae Beck, hairstylist, living in St. John's, comes from a big family. Ainsley Hawthorn, cultural historian and author, lives in St. John's. Josh McLearn and Marie Curtis, child-free couple, 14 years together. Congratulations. Both living in St. John's. And on the line from Halifax, Lindsay Harrington, who has written a memoir, Free or Less, stories about growing up in rural NL and being child-free. I'll go to the phones. Lindsay, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great, thanks. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for joining us for the hour. And I'll toss this question out, and we'll unpack it through the show. Right? We've got 55 minutes, but to get things started, when was the moment for you, or was there a moment, or did it kind of change over time when you knew that having kids or a child, not part of the life plan?
Yeah, for me, I definitely swung back and forth a few times. The first time I really seriously thought about not having kids was when I was in my late 20s and I had a boyfriend who I felt like I was mothering, and I really didn't enjoy that experience.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and how you could feel that way. For folks in studio, let's do a whip round too. Was it all at once over time?
Well, I think I knew since I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Really?
Yeah. Just because, I knew I didn't want to give birth to anyone. That sounded terrifying. And that's silly. You're 5, right?
Yeah, you're a kid, but yet, Shae, for you, this was the thought at the time.
Exactly, but that feeling never went away. And eventually, I thought that it was just something that happened to you one day, like the chicken pox.
Yeah.
And then I got older, and when I was about 20 years old, I got my first niece. And that was what made me realize how actually hard it was to be a mother. Mm. And then within the next couple of years, I watched a lot of my friends become mothers. Mm. And that really illustrated to me how difficult, how thankless the whole thing is. It's like constantly cleaning up after a birthday party you didn't get invited to.
So you're like, not for me.
Not for me at all.
Ainsley, what about yourself?
Well, I was married relatively young for our age group at 23 to an incredible person I've been with since I was 16. So
Familiar with this person. He's a great guy.
yes, yeah, Andrew, who some of you might know from listening to CBC. But so we, as an opposite sex couple, though I'm bisexual, had the option throughout our adult lives to try for biological children. But when we were in our 20s, we had no interest. When we were in our early 30s, we sort of put off making the decision. And it wasn't until we got to our mid to late 30s that we looked at each other and we thought, we need to come to a decision about this, or nature is going to make the decision for us. So we should probably have a conversation. And at that time, there were two deciding factors. Both of us had always been very much on the fence. I think if either of us had had a strong bent one way or the other, that would have made up our minds earlier. But we decided that we were and are very happy with our lives the way they are. We didn't feel that we were missing something or that we needed a child in order to be satisfied with our lives. And also from an ethical perspective, we sort of concluded that if you're on the fence, you should probably err on the side of not having children. Because like Shae said, raising children is really hard. Ideally, if you're making a choice about it, you're going into it with the passion and dedication to be a good parent to any child, regardless of their needs and their life experiences. And I think if you're not sure you want it, it's a better decision not to do it.
Yeah, if you can't put everything into it, you know.
I think if it's not a hell yes, it's probably a no.
Yeah, probably better. Yeah.
All right, let's go to the. Well, we've got a couple here as well, Josh and Marie. What? So yeah, let's go individually, and then we can go together, or however you want.
Well, I feel like all of the above
Yeah.
is also relevant to us as well. We have 6 nieces and nephews between my 3 older siblings. So seeing them raise these children, the oldest is almost 13, the youngest is, I think, almost 3. That's very hard. And I was like, I like spending time with them, but then being able to go home to our nice quiet house where your ears are not ringing.
Yeah.
But two, I think for us, like as we said, we've been together for a long time. It was kind of a gradual decision based on, I guess, our lived experience. So I remember us having a conversation back in like 2015, I want to say, where we said like, oh, we'll decide when we're like 30. I don't know if you remember that.
I think you're right for it.
But yeah, now that like we're 30, I'm 33, Josh is 32. Over the past couple of years, definitely, we're just like, no, like this is not for us once we saw all of the littles running around.
Isn't it funny when you're younger and you toss these dates out of like, by the time I'm 30 or 40 or because I'm turning 45 now in June, and all like I've passed those dates for a lot, like whether it's talking about kids or other things in life. It's kind of like you toss it ahead, be like, that's down the road, and I'll be a different person then to be able to make that decision. And then you're like, wait, I'm the same person through all of this, and now I'm hitting 45. Like it, I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Josh, what about yourself? Let's get the other side of this now.
Oh, boy. I don't know. I was kind of on the fence. I could go either way for a long time there. But, I'll just keep it pretty simple, I suppose. I call it what it is. Marie would be the one doing the vast majority of the work there. Women have kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So knowing that, it was kind of more like, well, it's really your call. And I'm happy with whichever way we go. And you sort of have to make that decision. Do you want to be with your partner more than you want to have kids?
Yeah.
Yes or no? In my case, yes. Here we are, 14 years.
Then when you make that decision, we'll jump into this with everyone else too. How does it come up socially or with family as if it shifts over time? And you're like, first it's like, well, down the road. And like, so it does the conversation you have with friends and family change over time with this? Or is there no conversation?
I didn't feel a whole lot of pressure or anything from my parents. They're great with whatever myself or my brother happens to want to do. So that was my experience. It was relatively easy, but other relatives of mine, you hear them, you got to have kids, and similar things have been said over time. Like, okay, we'll see.
So I'll just say, like, seeing I'm hosting the show, like my wife and I, we don't have kids, no intention to have kids, and like family's been pretty good over the years. But we were in South Korea in October, and we're paying for something at a store, and like I think it was like the clerk, this older lady, was kind of asking us, "So, how big's your family?" And like I'm kind of, and like through like my Korean understanding is not always there, depending on what folks are talking about. I was like, I think she's asking about us having kids, and I'm like, but we're just like buying something, and then it was like, no, and there's no plans. So I found it really funny that there was social pressure just from buying something at a store to like meeting a stranger. So it's funny where it can come from. Lindsay on the phone.
And not even, I would say, like, it's not that she was trying to pressure you. It's just that she hadn't even thought that it might be a different way.
No, exactly.
Which is,
there's no malice in it.
I felt.
Yeah, she's just curious.
Yeah, and that's what I really found, I think, with my family is they were just so excited about all the children coming into their life, and they almost mourned that experience for me and were afraid that I might be making a mistake.
So then tell us more about this memoir and what went into it and how long it took to get it together.
Yeah, so I've been writing this memoir for the last few years, and I'm currently querying it if there's any agents or publishers out there. But it was really something that I wrote to kind of heal from my journey, because I did feel a lot of societal and personal pressure on myself from my upbringing, I think, to have kids. So as I decided I didn't want kids, and then people around me kept having kids, I just got angry and resentful, and I really, really struggled. So I just really needed to kind of articulate that and explore that and understand that and share it.
What was, in your case, and we'll ask the others too, what was some of the societal pressure like as you were going through all this?
Well, even like small things, like when my husband and I got married during the pandemic, and then, it's like people aren't satisfied when you have a boyfriend. They're asking, when are you going to move in together? When you move in together, they're asking, when are you going to get engaged? When you get engaged, it's when's the wedding? And then when you get married, it's when are you going to have kids? Mm-hmm. So like lots of people would say that and say that you would change your mind, and they didn't mean anything by that. But when you're really struggling with feeling othered, it really hits different.
What folks know you've been writing and have written a memoir now. I'm assuming, especially if they don't. I mean, you're talking about it on the radio, so they will. But what was some of the reaction to when you started putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard or whatever?
I think a lot of people didn't understand why I was so passionate about this subject, but really, like, coming from a small town and having no child-free role models other than, Sister Anne down at the convent, it was really revolutionary for me to kind of come to this conclusion when it's something I assumed I would always do, like get the chicken pox, like of your other
like Shae was saying. Yeah. Anyone else here? So anyone else on the societal pressure around stuff? Ainsley, what are your thoughts?
I think I was lucky not to get pressure from family or my in-laws. I think maybe my family always perceived me as kind of a tweety academic eccentric. So there was no real sense that I was leaning towards, a maternal role at an early age or anything like that might have led them to believe the kids were in the offing. But I think maybe the largest form of social pressure, and I don't know if other people in the room would agree with this, is just the tacit assumption that it's the natural life course to grow up, get a job, get married, and have kids. So it's not even that many people are actively saying to you, why aren't you having kids? When are you having kids? But it's just the assumption in our society that is the normal thing for people to do, and that it is strange not to want that. So that's where I might see more subtle pressure, and not having experienced pressure from my family, I, like you, really only had comments occasionally from strangers. And it's surprising sometimes. The occasional stranger will get really riled up about it, will sort of say, you really should have kids. It is kids are the greatest thing in life and you'll regret not doing it. And not necessarily acknowledge that that's not everyone's experience or everyone's desire for their own life.
And that's someone that doesn't even know you.
Yes, yeah.
I personally didn't get a lot of this from family. I The most criticism I get actually about this subject is from people who are not parents yet,
Interesting.
right? Because, like, most of the time, young or old, whatever, people say to me, you know what, good for you. Good for you. You know what you don't want. And also, like, it's hard. And not enough people really realize that, I don't think. Yep, so most of the criticism that I get comes from people who are not parents yet, but want to be.
Marie, what about yourself?
I don't feel like we were overly pressured by like friends or family. Like, you know, you get the odd comment from like an aunt or your mother, but I feel like you can kind of just shut it down pretty quickly. So I feel like I'm lucky that I work in a situation where people are younger generally than me. They don't have children either, so it doesn't really come up as like a topic of conversation. But yes, the odd comment from a stranger can throw you off a little bit, but I don't think we've really had any crazy interactions or negative interactions about it. But I think the narrative is changing a little bit, especially like, I don't know if you've all seen like, you know, like child-free TikTok and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in the past couple of years. Like, it's becoming slowly more accepted, hopefully, anyway.
So then looking like through show notes and myself, Arlette Lazarenko was putting the show together, the associate producer for The Signal. We were having a discussion around like in some of the wording around this. And so is this, and I'm curious about your thoughts, and is this like is it a controversial topic? Did it used to be a controversial topic? Like, because you talked about it, some bits of a shift here, like with TikTok and everything else. Has it ever been a controversial topic? What do you folks think?
I think that it's less controversial now.
Yeah.
Like years ago, you either had a whole bunch of kids or you couldn't, and you were very sad about it.
Yeah.
And that was the only two things. And it wasn't like anybody ever really chose that because nobody really knew that it was a choice. And now people know it's a choice, but there's still a little bit of stigma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Josh, what do you think?
I feel about the same. I haven't really felt anything these days about that kind of pressure, but certainly back in the day, just like you said, you either had a ton of kids or you had none. And then it was kind of an unfortunate thing. And it was almost like you're not allowed to be or make that choice or be grateful for the fact that this is the life that you have and it's different from the norm. It's almost like put down, or maybe you were shunned a little bit.
Yeah. What about some of these societal, perhaps, misconceptions around stuff? We already talked about. I felt it too growing up. You feel like, okay, you grow up and there's a certain stack of things that kind of is almost supposed to happen, and one of those things is having a family and raising the family. But then there's also, whether it can be pop culture in movies, discussions at gatherings with friends, like, for example. So in my life, years ago, I had a friend say, because my wife's from South Korea, it's like, oh, you guys should have kids. They would look so great being biracial. I'm like, well, that's not the reason to go ahead and have them, you know. And another person, and another time, another social event, someone was like, well, you don't know what love is until you've, and it's like, well, I don't, like, I'm sure you've got a very special, and that's great, but these are some things that have come up. What about for the rest of you in that category? Lindsay Harrington in Halifax, we'll go to you on this first before we go back to the studio folks.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head then, because we all experience like different forms of love in our lives, and like maybe people who choose to have kids don't have some of the experiences that I have had and might not value those in the same way that I do. So, you know, comparison is the thief of joy. So we're all on our own journeys, and, you know, one type of life isn't inherently better than any other one. It's just that different paths are better for different people.
Anyone else want to jump in there? Ainsley.
I think that the term family.
Yes,
we
go
have
for
to
it.
totally redefine the term family, I think, because being asked, do you plan to have kids someday? That doesn't really bother me, because I actually don't have an issue whatsoever telling people, no, that's not in my life plan. I don't feel like that's for me or whatever. But when people say to me, do you plan on having a family someday?
Yes.
I say, I do have a family, actually. I was born into a family, and also I am married, and we are a family legally and emotionally. We are a family. So you don't have to have children to have a family, right?
Yeah, great point. And Ainsley, what about you?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I do think ideas about parenthood and having children are changing as more people are deciding not to have kids. And also as people who do have children are becoming more open about sharing their challenges, which used to be very, I think, stigmatized, as if you were struggling with parenthood, you wouldn't necessarily talk about it because you didn't want to be perceived as not loving your kids. And now I think people are more open about sharing that it's difficult and can be more difficult depending on what your circumstances are. So that's also changing ideas about parenthood. One of the stereotypes I find annoying is when people say that people who choose not to have children are selfish, or that making the decision not to have children is a selfish one. And what I find strange about that is deciding to have children is equally selfish. Whichever decision you make, it's based on what you think will bring you happiness and the life that you see for yourself. So neither one decision nor the other is more or less selfish. So I always find that sort of a strange way to frame it. And I also think it's not necessarily, people decide not to have children for different reasons, but something I think is a stereotype that is not true is also the people who choose not to have children don't like children. I mean, I think
I don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I'm sure some people don't like children, and if you don't like children and choose not to have children, that's perfectly legitimate. I love children. I love my biological niece and nephew. I love my friends' kids whom I consider my nephews. I babysit. I spend time with them. But that doesn't mean I want to be a parent myself. I want to give love to the kids in my life. And being a parent is not the only way to do that. In fact, and I don't think all people who don't have children need to do this, but I want to be part of the village for my friends who are parents.
Yeah.
You know, that's like a lower level of responsibility than being a parent, but I can still contribute to helping the parents in my life and helping out with the kids in my life.
I think that child-free grown-ups are actually really important in kids' lives. And I actually happen to love children, other people's. I just don't need that responsibility 24/7.
Yeah, and you still like kids. It's just like you said. It's about you looked at your life and saying, look, I 24/7, no thank you, but the occasional Saturday, right? Tuesday evening.
Almost all of my friends have them, and they go from newborn to 12 years old.
Yeah.
It's hard not to be around them. I like them.
Again, I mean, it's a big decision.
Yes.
Right? It's a giant decision. And Ainsley, I was curious, as a cultural historian and author, right? So how do you, for that hat, right? How do you measure or examine changes in culture, especially for this child-free discussion? What's a way of looking at that to judge over time how things have changed? Because Marie brought up just noticing on TikTok, and there's those changes. What else is it that you've seen or noticed?
Well, we live in a time where we can control our fertility more than people ever could at any other point in history, but people always tried.
Yeah.
So if you look at the most ancient documents, people are talking about using medications that they think will act as prophylactics. They're talking about abortion, like the most ancient medical texts have abortion. So people were trying always to control the number of children that they had. But generally speaking, people throughout history in heterosexual relationships, you didn't have a good way to control whether or not you have children. So it's only in the past roughly century that we've really had strong options around limiting our reproduction. And even when I look at my own family ancestry, my grandmother put off getting married until she was 29 years old. She was dating my grandfather for 9 years. And the reason specifically was because she didn't want to have a lot of kids. And they were Catholic.
Right.
And so as soon as she got married, she knew there'd be no ethical way to limit how many kids she had. So they got married at 29 and they had 5 children. Whereas if she married at 20, they might have had 10 kids, 15 kids, like some of my other ancestors. But that's an example of someone, at a time where it wasn't appropriate to control your fertility, who still wanted to limit the number of kids she was having. So it's always been something people have tried to do.
Folks, you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today on the show, we're talking about living child-free, right? Making the choice to live child-free. If you're one of these folks, if you're on the fence, if you've got a question for a guest or just thoughts on the conversation, you can text us 709-327-8206. Email us thesignal@cbc.ca, or you can leave us a voice message on the what we call the Signal line, 709-576-5260. Full house here today, plus we have a guest on the line here with me in the studio. We have Shae Beck, hairstylist living in St. John's, comes from a big family. Ainsley Hawthorn, cultural historian and author, lives in St. John's. Josh McLearn and Marie Curtis, child-free couple, 14 years together, both live in St. John's as well. And on the line from Halifax, we have Lindsay Harrington, who's written a memoir, Free or Less, stories about growing up in rural NL and being child-free. We had a note come in. It's a heavier one from Amanda Clark. Take a listen. It says, the subject is living childless. The seed of living without kids was planted after my baby brother died from cancer when we were young. Seeing the pain it caused my parents was gut-wrenching. Studying the world and school further made me very pessimistic about the world a child would inherit. I didn't feel the urge. I made the decision at 29 and had surgery. I've struggled with depression and couldn't let a child suffer mine or inherit it. I understand kids today making the decision because our world is on fire, literally. It's going in dark directions. Now at 50, I see the joy of friends' large, multi-generational families, and I feel sad. It's not easy aging without the support of children and family who will help in my old age. It's one regret, but I made the right decision. So that's from Amanda. Thoughts on the world we live in today?
I personally don't share that type of pessimism, but I do have friends who cite that as a reason that they don't want to have kids because they're concerned about the future of the world. I think she raises several interesting points in that message. One of them is the concern about aging and having support, but I think having kids doesn't guarantee you that either. Oh. I think we all know people who in their senior years either, perhaps like tragically their children die before they do, they become estranged from their children are still dependent and can't help them. So I don't think that's, any guarantee.
It's not an insurance policy.
Yeah, that's right. And also, the other interesting thing she raises, and I don't know if this is the experience of anyone in the room, but I think it's important to acknowledge, is she said she had surgery when she was 29. And I think it's important to mention that it is very difficult for people to get prophylactic, like sterilization surgeries. So I know many, many people, especially women, who have wanted to have their tubes tied. It's less common for men with vasectomies, but women wanting to have their tubes tied where doctors have refused to do it.
Yeah.
They want to wait until the woman is married, until so that they can talk with a quote a presumptive like husband who can help them make that decision until the woman is older. Yeah, Adam is looking at me shocked. Genuinely, this happens
I know.
to people.
Yeah.
She's telling the truth.
Yeah, or until they're older. And so even women who are adults, who are at an age where they can make those decisions about their own fertility, are sometimes prevented from doing that by our medical system.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking a buddy of mine I was in the Navy with years ago, no problem, right? Walked into the doctor's office and he talked about it like the next week when we were out. And he was like, guess what? I'm like, oh, really? And he was like, yeah, I don't want to have kids. I'm like, oh, okay. And there was nothing stacked against him in the conversation other than like kind of, are you sure? He was like, yeah, this is what I want. And like that. But as we're pointing out, though, big differences between how men and women can be treated
it's a
in
form of
healthcare
medical
systems.
sexism.
Yeah.
It's like paternalism, it's such a big decision. Are you sure you can make it? Whereas the medical system accepts a man making it. So it is something to be aware of.
Yeah, no, fantastic points. Anyone else with thoughts on the email, Marie?
Yeah, I've actually had conversations with people I know who have kids about them feeling guilty about bringing a kid into the world currently. So that, I wouldn't say that like that's not one of my primary reasons for not having kids, but yes, it is a factor when you think about, climate change and, all the wonderful politics currently happening. But yeah, I think, and going to the other point about like aging, a child I don't think should be anybody's, end of life plan, regardless if you have a kid or not.
Yeah, right. Because lots of things can happen in life. I'll just put it that way. We've got Shannon Williams on the line, a home care worker who's 33 and a single. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being part of the show. Thanks for taking time for a call. So I gave a little introduction. There's obviously so much more to you than those couple lines. Tell us more about yourself and thoughts around being child-free.
Well, I am a 33 single queer woman. I've been working in home care for about 9 years. I take care of a girl with special needs. I've been with her 9 years in June, and that's about it.
When you think about whether it's sometimes societal pressure or you look at other folks having kids, like what's been in the math for you or the thought process for you around not wanting children?
Well, I'm actually a bit of a different case, I guess, because I want children more than anything in the world. I was born to be a mom. I've always wanted to be a mom. And I recently came to the decision that I am not going to have kids as much as I would love to. I just can't.
Why not? If you don't mind me asking.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, no problem. Well, it's just the way the world is going, especially the past 2 months. The world is just a very, very, very scary place right now, and I cannot justify bringing a kid in this world when they didn't ask to be brought into it. I wonder if I have if I have a little girl, is she going to have bodily autonomy? If I have a little boy, if he's queer, what's going to happen? And the way things are going, they're not going to stand a chance. So
you're kind of, without mentioning, you're pointing to what you think will happen with spillover from what's happening south of the border.
It absolutely will.
Yeah.
We are very, very, very close behind the United States, and I don't think people realize how bad it is going to get here in the next couple of years, but it's not worth bringing a child into, for sure.
Is there anything that do you think that could change that for you? Is there any change in whether it's 4 years from now or a little bit more that could change that thought process? But there's if there would have to be a very significant change in politics and how people are being treated for simply existing and things like that. If the world became better, yes, I would consider it. But as of now, it's not going to happen. How hard do you think I'm asking you to kind of really think down the road for after making this decision, but how hard do you think this is going to be on you personally over the years? If someone who really would love to have a kid or kids, but yet because of the world around us, for how you feel about it, you've decided not to.
It's very difficult, actually. It was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. Mm-hmm. Because it's a goal and a dream that I've had since I was little, and it breaks my heart that I can't do it, but I just can't justify it.
Shae Williams, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and an opinion on this show. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. All right, so folks back here in the studio, there are a lot of folks who I think feel with this moment, you can look at climate change, you look at what went on in California, you look at the northern sea ice, you look at some of the political speeches that have been made in recent days, weeks, months. You can have a feeling, Shae? Thoughts?
Oh, sometimes even when I talk about this with older people, they say, you know what, you're right. If I was a younger person right now, I don't think I'd be able to.
Right.
Because of, the way everything is going. And like the other call said, the world's literally on fire.
What about cost? Because it's something I think of a lot.
That's a no-brainer.
Right? Yeah. Like I look at the baby boom, and I kind of wonder sometimes how, like, the grandparents of the current generation did it with having, like, the parents of the boomers having so many kids. Because nowadays, with the world we live in, it's like, well, you got to have a computer, and it's teenagers some form of smartphone. Like the costs for organizing for sports to music to tutors and everything else. It just seems like it's so much.
It's so much.
Yeah, it's very expensive to have a child, and I do think, I'm a middle-class person, and I don't know how we would afford a child if we had made that decision. But I also think our standards of living and what we think is the right way to raise a child have changed a lot.
Yeah, like
since our
seatbelts
grandparents'
came in the
generation.
80s.
Yeah, but not even safety, like when you think about the way the baby boomers were raised.
Yeah.
Right? We're living in a house that belonged to my grandparents-in-law, where it's just the two of us. We feel like it's a little bungalow. We feel like it's the right size for two people. But two kids were raised in that house, and at its maximum, the grandmother was also living there. So 3 generations, 5 people lived in that house. They wanted to have 2 more kids. They also would have raised those kids in that house. So people often raised more children in smaller spaces. And just had a lot less than we do. Had one car if you had a car, cooked all your food at home, didn't have any kind of extra luxuries like we do. So I also think...
There are no trips to Florida or anywhere, outside of the province.
Nobody went on trips years ago.
Many people, yeah.
And I do think the drawback, you could still raise a child that way. I think the drawback is the way they might interact with their peers, because the expectation is for kids to have lots of extracurriculars and trips, like you said, and all these different things, and that might make it difficult on the child. But I think our standards have changed in a way that makes it a lot more difficult for parents and a lot more expensive.
Lindsay, Lindsay, go ahead. Yeah, please. I was just about to ask.
I've been really thinking about, these issues that folks are having that make them think that it's the best choice not to have children, whether that be climate change or economics. And there are some folks who really do want to have kids, but they can't because of those factors. And the governments are sometimes putting in policies to try to encourage people to have kids, but they're not addressing those underlying issues. And that's where they need to put the focus. Like even, with Roe v. Wade in the States and folks having to have kids that they don't want to have. In Russia, they've now banned child-free influencers and content on media. But they're really trying to force people to have kids instead of making the society a place where people can have children if they want and those children to flourish.
Yeah, I was going to bring up not the Russia side of it, but I was looking back on an old 2019 New York Times article. This was when, because Japan also, right? We talk about those low countries with really, really low birth rates. Japan is one of them. So back in 2019, here's the news story. Japan's finance minister apologized on Tuesday for saying that childless people were to blame for the country's declining population and rising social security costs. The minister, Taro Aso, said on Sunday that Japan's national health insurance system helped to extend the longevity of Japanese people. Some people blame the elderly, a demographic with high medical expenses, for the rise in social security costs, he added, but it's wrong. It's more problematic that people did not have enough babies. Now, he apologized for this. It was a big thing. But it's this discussion, and also Taro Aso was known for putting his foot in his mouth probably more than not. That being said, for the discussion around certain countries, you can include Canada in this, there does come up a bit of a responsibility question. So on one side of this discussion, we say, hey, folks are not having kids because of fears of climate change, the political feeling of the time. And at the other bit, it's like, well, wait, if we're going to help support folks who are retiring and the social infrastructure of needing population growth, where do you feel on this range of responsibility? Or do you think it's like, well, push that to the side, we're going to do what we're going to do?
Constant population growth is going to destroy the world. Having an economy based on constant population growth is not sustainable. That's how we've all built our economies. It cannot work. in the long term. We need to revise. And even if we wanted to continue population growth in a country like Canada, people who currently live in the country do not need to be having kids at a replacement rate to do that. We can welcome people from other countries into Canada. So I don't see that as I see that as a really problematic perspective, is that we need to continue growing the human population on the planet forever.
Yeah, because I mean, it's whether it's climate change and also just the fact of, to put it simply, like eating the earth, right?
Yes.
The more people there are, and the
We
less.
can't sustain a human population that grows forever.
No. Anyone else?
Pretty well nailed it, I'd say. I mean, really, like,
Ainsley's pretty good when when she starts.
When I go mouth off.
oh man, it's good. I'm holding it back here for sure. But it's simply like, if you want people to have more kids, make it easier for people to have kids.
Yeah.
Minimum wage used to be a livable wage. Now it's keep it as low as possible because it's cheaper for the, whatever employer.
I think another big thing about that is childcare. Like, I'm assuming, we all used to be able to go to our grandparents' house because our grandparents were actually retired when we were little. And now our parents are working until they're like 85 because, they have to. And we don't have anywhere to drop our kids off every day while we're working. We have to stay home. Or we can work and then spend all of that money on daycare.
Yeah. Right. And we've done shows, and we will be doing more shows on the cost of childcare and the hurdles around it and everything else. Marie, any thoughts from you?
I had a thought, and now it's
That's
completely
okay.
gone.
He pushed it through. Don't you worry. I'll be back for the next
All
thought.
right.
Because I've got an email here from Sarah Neely White. Hi, Adam. I'd love to call on today's show, but I'm about to go into class. No worries. Love this topic of discussion. I wanted to add that there tends to be a view that there are just two groups, those who want to have children and always wanted them and hopefully do get to have them, and those who decided not to and are child-free by choice. An often overlooked group is the one I belong to. A person who ultimately did decide to have a child, but after years of uncertainty, ambivalence, and deliberation. It was a very long road to making the decision. Sometimes we tend to assume that those who ultimately had a kid arrived at the decision with ease. It's so important that we talk about all the nuances and ambiguities of this journey. Great conversation, and so happy for chosen family, and that some of my friends without biological children get to be aunts and uncles to my son. Thanks, Zarin. Zarin, thank you so much for that note. Thoughts on that? Because yes, right, it's a very, very important point about nuance here for this discussion today.
I love that.
Zarin, who is part of my chosen family, makes a great point. And I would say there's also a group of people, and Lindsay mentioned this earlier, who have children not by choice.
Yeah.
So whether that's they're in a circumstance or a society where they don't have options for birth control, whether they're in the States and now that Roe v. Wade has been turned over, they can't access abortion. So there are also people who go into parenthood for a variety of reasons without the opportunity to make a free choice about it.
Or there are people pressured by a spouse who don't want to lose that spouse and are now
Living with the consequences.
Yeah.
Lindsay Harrington, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think she makes a great choice. And I think that my life could have went either way, depending on, when I had decided or what partner I had ended up with. And my life probably would have been great either way, right? But the thing is, the more discussion we have about it and the more, intentional folks' decisions are, then the better those decisions are going to be for that particular individual. So definitely, I think doing that reflection and having that thought about what do I want my life to look like and how do I get there? If we can all do that more, then we're going to have more filling lives that are custom to us.
So being at this point for everyone, if there's folks listening who are kind of wondering about, thinking about what they're trying to do, right? Maybe they're just dating someone and they know, well, hey, I don't want to have kids, or they're thinking maybe I don't. Any advice on how to, like if you were to look back for yourselves or thinking for other folks about advice for how to process this or how to go about kind of meandering your way down until you're 30, 35 or whatever else for making these decisions, especially if like with Zarin's email, right? Some folks later in life are like, actually, no, I do want to have kids, and then which can happen. I mean, life is it's long and complicated. So any thoughts on advice?
I think that when you're dating somebody, you should have that conversation fairly early.
Yeah, communication is pretty important. Hey, when you're dating someone, like have the big discussions.
Yes.
Like, when you're
You
thinking
should have
about
that
maybe
conversation
spending a
fairly
life
early.
together.
And people will say, like, oh my God, you've only been talking for however long, or you've only been together for this long, this amount of time. But, and that's so early to be talking about kids. And I was like, no, it's not talking about having them. It's not talking about when we're going to have them, when we barely know each other. It's talking about what we're going to do if it happens unexpectedly while we don't know each other. Or we're talking about what our expectations are in case this turns into a long-term serious thing.
Yeah. Some
Like,
of these are do
if I
not
really
pass
don't
go,
want that
do not
someday-
collect $200 moments, right? Like,
Yes.
they're big things.
If I really don't want that someday, I don't want to be with, you don't want to be with somebody for a few years and for them to just wait for you to grow out of that phase.
Right.
Right.
Right, that phase. Yeah. Some things are...
And personally, I got it all out of the way early, and it was great.
So, yeah, you made sure to have the conversations right away.
Oh, yeah. And then also, the conversation should be revisited probably several times over a couple, because maybe people's feelings change about it, but you have to talk about it when it does, if it does.
Open communication lines.
Definitely.
Anyone else with thoughts?
Well, I'm a big reader, so I read a lot of books when I was kind of struggling with this topic about other folks who were struggling with the topic. So obviously I recommend my book when it's published, but there's also a lot more books on the subject these days. So there's one called The Panic Years. There's one called Others Like Me. So there are books exploring trying to make this decision, which is arguably the biggest decision you're ever going to make. So kind of really finding resources that are going to help you make that decision.
Yeah. I mean, so when you're writing your memoir, and like, how much reading and research did you do around it? Because it's one thing to write a memoir of your own experience, but also I'm hearing, obviously, you were looking for other places for information to see how others are phrasing things, talking about, and what the conversation is.
Yeah, and I did a lot of personal research on my decision. I didn't.
Right.
My book is not fact based. I don't have statistics and things in there. That's not my vibe for nonfiction. But there are a lot of books out there like that. If that's something that's appealing to folks.
Ainsley, you're going to say.
It's the kind of thing I'd be very hesitant to give advice about because it is so personal. But I would say that no matter what decisions you make in life, regret is possible. Regret is possible whether you choose not to have kids and you regret it later, and regret is possible whether you choose to have kids. There's a Reddit group that people may be familiar with called Regretful Parents, where
I was just about to say that.
where people with children talk about the fact that they are sorry they made that decision. So that does happen to people as well.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I think if you're going to regret one or the other, it's better to regret not having kids because you haven't brought another human being into the picture.
And it's not that the regretful parents on Reddit don't love their children. They probably do. They just think, I would not have made this decision if I knew this back then, or this isn't how I thought it was going to be, or,
Absolutely. And I don't necessarily think it's the most important decision you're going to make in your life. Life is very complicated and can be full in many different ways.
Lots of different types of lives out there with stuff happening. So,
Yeah. So I don't think you need to put all your eggs in this basket.
definitely.
I feel like that's actually good advice. Go read Regretful Parents.
Yes.
I was going to say, you should have honest conversations with people who have children and people, if you can, people who are older that don't have children as well, get their perspective. Even if you listen to a podcast or listen to an interview, ideally in person would be better. But that would be my advice, is kind of get different perspectives and then think about how your day-to-day life changes based on your decisions.
yeah, you're trying to figure stuff out in life. Like getting a mortgage, I looked around and read about it. So deciding whether or not to have kids is an important thing to read about and figure out what people are saying. And also, like you said, I like the Reddit group for people who regret having kids. Any thoughts on advice?
No, it's just kind
You're
of
like, everyone said
interesting.
some great
I
stuff
know.
again, and Adam came to me last.
I don't know, it's just interesting that you mentioned doing your research for getting a mortgage or buying a car or what have you. And then with children, you always hear this well, no one's ever really ready to have children. I'm like, okay, so it's okay to not be prepared to have children, but you have to be prepared to do all of these other things in your life. But the children part is one of the biggest decisions you're ever going to make.
And when you have children, you have to be prepared to give up all your weekends to spend them at tournaments for sports that you probably don't care about, or at kids' birthday parties where everybody coughs.
Oh, I ran into a buddy of mine over Christmas talking about his kids' hockey schedules, and I was like, oh, that's a lot. But now he loves it, but just on my side of it, I was like, that's a lot of hockey, to bring some levity to the conversation. And do you like me? If this is too personal, tell me. But how often do you guys update your conversations around just revisiting stuff?
Never. Now we're pretty firmly on the
you're
the
on
no.
it. So so you're both firmly. So there's no.
I feel like it's just an ongoing conversation, especially if you're with somebody long term. It's like, well, we're always making these decisions together. It's not individual. If you're with someone for 14 years, you're like, okay, we're making this decision as a group, right?
Yeah, I think for us it was every so often. It's not like we sit down and say, "Let's hear we need updates on these 5 different life decisions now." It's update day, but yes, over time, like something pops up, and then the nuance and the flavor of the conversation is still in the direction that we've always thought we were in, which is like, oh, that's great.
Or someone has a kid, and then you start talking about it, or you have child-free friends that talk about it, and then you can kind of continue that conversation.
Yeah, Ainsley, what about with yourself?
Well, I'm 43 now, so it's at this stage, and there are people who have children older, it's not the ideal age to have a biological child. So I think that window has mostly closed. Although I will say I've been warned by several people that when you get into your 40s and like perimenopause, your fertility can actually spike at certain stages. So everyone be extra cautious. I'm being extra cautious. Yeah, but I think we're also very satisfied with the conversations we've had over the years and the decision we've ultimately come to.
Shae, final thoughts for this is the part where I ask everyone their final thoughts for about 30 seconds. If there's anything else you want to add or mention in the conversation.
Sometimes I think it wouldn't be so bad to be a father.
Right?
No, I'm kidding. No, I had like a really, really hands-on dad
Yeah.
growing up. And I know a lot of guy friends right now who are really hands-on dads. But most of the time, I just think that like a lot of men view having a baby or a child the same way that a kid views getting a puppy.
Oh, a buddy of mine, when he had a kid years ago, he was just like, I just can't wait till he's like 19 so I can have a beer with him. I was like, I think you're talking about friends.
Yeah,
You can just get a
that's
friend.
what friends are for. Yeah, I agree. And it's like Josh said, most of the grunt work is for the mom. Most of this is for the... I just think that a lot of men are blissfully unaware. It's not their fault, but they're blissfully unaware of just how hard it is to actually be a mother, to how hard it is on your mental health and your body and everything like that. And I mean, I've known guys in my 20s too who are like, oh, I want to have at least 3 children by the time I'm 32.
He's like, do you now?
And I'm like, oh my God, so you need somebody to hold your hand while you have them?
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of learning can be done on the journeys of life. Lindsay Harrington, any final thoughts for you?
Just that I'm really glad that more conversation is happening about this and about the nuances of parenthood or choosing not to be a parent. I know there's a movie in the theater right now called Night. There's a swear word, so I'm not sure I'm allowed to say it, but it's talking about that experience of being a mother during those all-consuming first years.
Night B word, yeah.
Yeah. So it could be very consuming for a few years. So just having empathy for the child-free folks in your life, for the parents in your life, for everybody, really. Having
empathy is a good thing. Less than 30 seconds left. Anyone with a final thought? I'm looking at the last 3 here.
I would just say that when we talk about being child-free, we often frame it negatively in the sense of not having children, deciding not to do something. But I see it quite positively, that we're living great lives that we're really enjoying, and it doesn't necessarily arise from pessimism at all.
We should ask more people why they want to.
See, there you go. And we'll leave it there. Folks, thanks for this conversation today. I much appreciate it. Shae Beck, Ainsley Hawthorn, Josh McLearn, Marie Curtis, and on the line from Halifax, Lindsay Harrington. Thank you so much, folks. That is it for today's show. As always, you've got thoughts for us, email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. Call the Signal line and leave a message, 709-576-5260. Tomorrow on the show, you may have heard about this in the news, the federal government is slashing allocations of economic immigration spaces for this province, cutting it in two. We're going to talk about that, what it means for businesses, what it means for the province, and we're going to have folks in here who are impacted by it. That's tomorrow on The Signal.